Sigmund Freud. Whether you think of him as a genius or a total charlatan, his ideas about the mind, the ego, the id, the unconscious, they've literally shaped our world for over a century. But what if his theories weren't just abstract psychological concepts? What if he was, without even knowing it, describing the actual physical wiring of the human brain?
Okay, let's just dive right into that. Was Freud secretly a neuroscientist? It's a pretty provocative question, right? But it's one that modern neuroscience is surprisingly starting to answer. So we're going to go on a little neuroscientific detective story to see if we can find the ghost of Freud's ideas lurking in the machinery of our brains.
So on one side, you have Freud's world, the psychoanalytic couch, dream analysis, slips of the tongue, you know the deal. And on the other, you've got the modern neuroscience lab, these incredible fMRI machines mapping the brain's activity in real time. For decades, these two worlds, they couldn't have been further apart. But now, that's all changing.
To solve this little mystery, we're going to do something pretty cool. We're going to place Freud's century-old map of the mind directly on top of today's cutting-edge maps of the brain. And the overlaps we're going to find, well, they're nothing short of remarkable.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll introduce our two main players, Freud's ego and a specific brain network discovered by fMRI. Then we'll dive into the more primal forces of the id, uncover a stunningly elegant theory that actually ties them all together, and finally, we'll talk about why this connection is so incredibly important for understanding ourselves. So let's kick off our investigation by looking at the part of our mind that we usually think of as us. The part that organizes our thoughts and kind of keeps us grounded in reality. For Freud, this was the ego. The easiest way to think of it is as the CEO of your mind. It's the coherent, organized part that has to manage your inner world, deal with the outer world, and give you that stable sense of who you are. He said the ego's operating system was something he called the secondary process. This is all about rational, logical thought, the kind of thinking that keeps our more chaotic, primitive impulses in check. Now, hold on to that thought. Let's jump forward about 100 years, straight into the neuroimaging lab. And I want you to meet the default mode network, or DMN for short. This is a whole network of brain regions that just hums with activity whenever we're not focused on some task in the outside world. It's what's firing away when you're daydreaming, remembering something from your past, or wondering what other people think of you. In short, it's the brain's home base for self-reflection. Okay, and this is where it gets really wild. When you put these two concepts side by side, the parallels are just uncanny. Freud's ego manages our primal urges. Well, neuroscience shows the DMN literally works to suppress activity in our lower-level emotional systems. The ego creates our sense of self. The DMN is most active during, you guessed it, self-reflection. The ego has to test reality. The DMN deactivates when we need to focus on a task in the outside world. I mean, come on, the resemblance is just incredible.
So if the ego is the mind's CEO, what about the chaotic factory floor it's trying to manage? Well, this brings us to the other, wilder side of Freud's model.
And that would be Freud's id. It operates on what he called the primary process, which is a mode of thinking that's primitive. It's illogical, and it's totally driven by raw emotion and instinct. This is the part of the mind where energy just flows freely, without any of the usual rules of logic or reality. And this isn't just some abstract concept. Freud believed this primary process actually becomes visible to us in certain states of consciousness. When the ego's control gets a little weak. Just think about the bizarre logic of dreams, the distorted reality of psychosis, or the altered perceptions people have on certain drugs. Take, for example, something called a temporal lobe aura. In this state, one of the ego's most important jobs, time perception, completely dissolves. People report that time seems endless, or that a whole eternity of experience gets packed into a single moment. Our stable, linear sense of time is a construction of that secondary process, and right here we can see it falling apart. And here is the crucial neuroscientific link. All those states, dreaming, psychosis, the effects of hallucinogens, are associated with a very specific pattern of brain activity. We're talking about unconstrained, high-amplitude, low-frequency electrical bursts coming from the brain's deep emotional centers, like the limbic system. It is the neurological signature of what Freud called freely mobile psychical energy. It's a perfect match. Okay, so this is the crucial point. We've got an organized top-down system, the ego, or the DMN, and a chaotic bottom-up system, the id, or the limbic system. So how do they interact? It turns out both Freud and modern neuroscience came up with a very, very similar answer.
Over a century ago, Freud proposed what he called the principle of constancy. He argued that the fundamental job of our mental apparatus is to keep internal chaos, what he called sums of excitation, as low as possible. In other words, the mind hates chaos and is constantly working to create order.
Now, fast forward to today, one of the leading theories in all of computational neuroscience is called the free energy principle. It says that the brain is essentially a prediction machine. Its main job is to minimize surprise, or what scientists call prediction error. Your brain builds a model of the world and is constantly working to make sure incoming information from your senses matches its predictions. A surprise is an error, and the brain works tirelessly to explain it away.
And this process works as a hierarchy. So first, raw, chaotic data comes up from our senses. Then, our brain's high-level models, like the DMN, generate a prediction to explain that data. That prediction is sent back down, and it effectively cancels out the sensory noise. When this all works well, surprise is minimized, and our perception of reality feels stable and coherent.
And here it is, the grand synthesis. Freud's ego, with its secondary process, is the brain's high-level prediction system. Its job of binding the chaotic energy of the id is a perfect metaphor for the DMN's job of minimizing the prediction errors that are constantly bubbling up from the more primitive limbic system. It's the same fundamental principle, just described in two different languages, a century apart.
So what does this all mean? Why does it matter that a 100-year-old psychological model seems to map so neatly onto 21st century brain science?
So let's just recap the striking parallels we've uncovered. The ego's functions align almost perfectly with the default mode network. The id's chaotic primary process maps right onto unconstrained activity in the brain's emotional centers, and Freud's core idea of minimizing psychical energy is nearly identical to the modern free energy principle. And the goal here isn't just to vindicate Freud. It's about building a bridge. For the first time, we really have a framework that can connect our subjective psychological experience, our sense of self, our emotions, our dreams, to the objective biological processes of the brain. It lets us anchor these huge, profound ideas in something we can actually measure.
You know, this synthesis of old and new opens up so many fascinating possibilities. It suggests that some of the deepest insights into the human condition might have been hiding in plain sight for decades, just waiting for the right tools to come along and reveal the physical truth behind the metaphor. It really leaves you wondering, what else are we on the verge of rediscovering?